Welcome to Politics for Happy People, fun conversations about serious issues. I'm your host, Ashley Vaughn.
And I am your other host, Joseph Backholm. I'm so glad that you are with us. So glad. Did I quite get that word out? Ashley, we're off to a rip-roaring start. I am so glad, in fact.
You did that for me. You did that to make me happy.
I did. Yes. What are we talking about today? How to enunciate words. Besides that, we're talking about the Southern Poverty Law Center, right? Something a little bit more serious than that. What's an SPLC? You might be asking that. The Southern Poverty Law Center that's the organization that we're going to talk about today. And there's lots of interesting kind of current but old implications for this organization, because they have recently been indicted by the Department of Justice on 11 counts of wire fraud, false statements to banks, and concealment, money laundering, etc. They are being accused of funneling more than $3 million between 2014 and 2023 to white supremacist organizations like the Ku Klux Klan, Aryan Nations, and the National Socialist Party of America. Ashley, why does that matter? Why are we surprised that the SPLC would be funneling money to white supremacists?
Well, it's very surprising, and it's very suspect because this group, the SPLC, is claiming to be fighting white supremacy. So to be funneling a significant amount of money to these undeniably racist organizations, it's obviously a huge problem.
Yeah, and let's talk about the history, because that's the issue. They claim to be their stated purpose is to oppose white supremacy. So the idea that they would be funneling money to white supremacists seems contradictory, and we'll talk about why they think it's not as bad as it looks in a moment. But let's talk about their history for a moment, because again, the Southern Poverty Law Center got its start actually fighting white supremacists. And one of the cases that really launched them back in 1979, the United Klans of America case out of Mobile, Alabama. The SPLC represented the mother of a young man named Michael McDonald, who was a black teenager lynched by the mob. The SPLC won a $7 million judgment against the Klan on behalf of the family. That bankrupted the Klan, which is, of course, wonderful justice for the family. It's incomplete justice always when somebody is murdered. Money doesn't solve that problem for you. But it was justice against the Klan, bankrupted the organization, and helped to launch the SPLC as this really significant, meaningful, impactful anti-white supremacy organization. Because, a place like Mobile, Alabama, in the 70s, the Klan had real social clout in some communities. And so taking them on in a public, serious way was meaningful public work. So that's what got them started. And ever since then, I think the issue is most people have continued to associate them with efforts to eradicate racism. And fortunately, since the 1970s in America, there has been a lot more sympathy for the effort to eradicate racism, and in particular, organizations that are overtly and explicitly white supremacist. Do you think people know this about the SPLC?
I think they've definitely kept this reputation of being against racism and fighting racism, which is a good thing. I think their origin story has carried through. I think what we see now, though, when you look into the SPLC, that it's become something very different than what it started as.
That's right. And let's develop that because now they are less known for specific, lawsuits against white supremacist organizations because, frankly, there aren't that many white supremacist organizations. And so the thing they're most known for these days is their hate map. But at some point in their history, they wanted to catalog all of the white supremacist organizations in America so people knew who the problems were, where they were located, and how we can fix them. And of course, that does seem like a decent public service, that if there are white supremacists in my neighborhood, I want to know about that. Well, it evolved over time from becoming a map that identified chapters of the Ku Klux Klan to being more broadly a hate map. And understanding what this hate map is and its different categories is, I think, actually really, really instructive to understand what has happened to the SPLC over time, because the hate map now has a whole bunch of different categories because they filter on this map by ideology. And you can go, anybody can find the SPLC. It's splc.org/hate-map if you want to see this map for yourself. And it lists all these organizations in all of the states. And there are the categories now. It's not white supremacists, which is what this started off being. There's now anti-immigrant, anti-LGBT, anti-Muslim, anti-government general, and we'll talk about that category in a moment, anti-Semitism, Christian identity, Christian supremacy, conspiracy propagandists, constitutional sheriffs, which is a category I love, right? If you told me, I didn't even know this was a category.
A sheriff that believes in the Constitution.
Yeah, if you told me that someone was a constitutional sheriff 30 seconds ago, I'd be like, well, good for them. But that category is something that the SPLC has identified as troubling enough to get you on the hate map. And that, again, constitutional sheriffs is 2 categories above Ku Klux Klan, right? So the map has expanded really, really broadly. And let's talk about, because we're in North Carolina, how this is working itself out. Because in North Carolina, the SPLC identifies 44 total hate groups. 27 of those are identified as hate groups under the quote-unquote anti-government category. So in addition to constitutional sheriffs, you can be anti-government. That gets you on the hate map, along with the Klan. 16 of these 27 anti-government organizations are local chapters of Moms for Liberty. So that represents, about 25% of the entire, actually more than 25% of the entire hate map in North Carolina is local chapters of the Moms for Liberty. And I think most people do not know this. And I mean, because we know the Moms for Liberty. We have worked with people who work for the Moms for Liberty. That organization sprouted up in the last handful of years, really dealing with school boards.
That's right.
Curriculums.
Since the time of COVID, when kids were home and parents were seeing what kids were being taught, and parents' rights in education became kind of forefront in the conversation, Moms for Liberty has really been a great partner for our organization in the effort to rightly restore to parents that role of being directing and overseeing their children's education in North Carolina. And so, but they are designated here by the SPLC as being a hate group.
They are anti-government taking over our children. That's what they really are. But they have, by virtue of being opposed to the government having every say they want over our children's lives, they have been given this designation by the SPLC as anti-government. Now they are located on the hate map alongside the Ku Klux Klan. And those things are not the same. They are not.
One of these things is not like the other. I mean, I'm looking through the list here. I've got it pulled up, Moms for Liberty, and then you have the KKK, on this same list. It's and then you also have, Pavement Education Project on this list, another organization that we've worked with. They're also listed as an anti-government organization. This is a nonprofit whose purpose and mission is to remove sexually explicit materials from schools, from their curriculum, from their school libraries, And Janet Peterson, our friend, she has gone through a lot of the libraries in the public schools around the state and cataloged these books and even rated them in terms of the level of obscenity. But yeah, I mean, she has a suitcase full of books that have, I mean, truly, it's like cartoon pornography is in some of these books, and shows them to legislators and says, "Hey, this isn't edifying. This isn't educationally appropriate. This isn't helpful at all to be in the schools. Can we please do something to rein this in?" And that is what the SPLC is designating as hate on their hate map. I guess it's not technically, and it says anti-government group, but I mean it's on the hate map, yeah, right? And you just look at this and you start thinking to yourself, okay, we talked about one of these things is not like the other. Like Pavement Education Project, not at all in any way like the KKK. So what do these things have in common? Well, presumably this is just a list of people that the SPLC doesn't like.
And that is, I think that's the one of the things we have to understand now is how much the world has changed. That the Southern Poverty Law Center went from being a genuine civil rights advocacy organization to just part of the left-wing political apparatus. And what do they have in common? Well, they disagree with leftist causes. Moms for Liberty, they like school choice, they like parental rights, they do not want educational bureaucrats running their children's lives and their family and controlling your children. Pavement Education, same thing. That's what they have in common. So they don't want the government having unbridled authority to take our children and teach them anything they think is good for us because they think the parents should be in charge of the children. The left believes actually the experts should be in charge of the children. So if you are opposed to us benevolent experts being in charge of your children, then you are anti-government. You're basically the Klan. That's the connection that they've made. Normie America doesn't make that connection. The left political machinery, they make that connection. And so they get put on the same app. They get put in the same categories because they see those things as kind of the same. And I think that just helps us understand the transition the organization has made. And the public isn't necessarily aware of, oh, they are just now kind of left-wing political operatives, and they will, malign anybody who is on the right.
Someone made an interesting point with this issue. They don't have the Catholic Church on their hate map. And they said, well, it seems like they're kind of picking on some smaller groups, picking on the little fish, so to speak. Are they going to take on the Catholic Church? Are they going to take on the SBC? Those organizations aren't the hate map. I thought that was kind of interesting. But Joseph, do you think that designating someone as a hater, saying that this is a hateful group, what kind of consequences can come from that? Like what kind of real world things can happen?
Well, and let's talk. Yeah, that's right. How has this map been used? Is this just like bad messaging and it's unkind? But there have been some very real world consequences from this. Sadly, we've seen a rise in political violence in the country in recent days, months, and years. But go back, I don't know, 14, 15 years ago now, maybe, there was a young man in Washington, D.C., who had been kind of a radicalized LGBTQ activist, and he wanted to do something to, to push back against the anti-LGBT hate groups. And he went into the office of the Family Research Council in Washington, D.C., because that was the hate group nearest him, according to their map. And he went in there with weapons and a backpack full of Chick-fil-A sandwiches. And the Family Research Council in D.C. is a place where I've worked. I've spent a lot of time there. My friend Leo Johnson was the security officer that day, and he shot Leo in the arm, and fortunately it was not lethal. Leo was still able to immobilize him, And he's been in prison ever since, which is a wonderful thing. But he had the expressed intention of walking through that office, shooting everybody in it, as many as he could, many of whom are my friends, and throwing Chick-fil-A sandwiches at their feet, because at that moment, people kind of associated Chick-fil-A with kind of Christian right-wing causes, because the Cathy family, who owns that restaurant, or owns that chain, and I'm forgetting the name of the founder, who is no longer, he's since deceased, but he'd said a lot of things just about the creation order and the family that the left found to be highly offensive, but very consistent with Orthodox biblical Christianity.
So that's why he wanted to throw Chick-fil-A sandwiches at people and shoot them.
That's exactly right. And so, yeah, it's not just it's just not a silly mistake. There have been real consequences by those who are easily radicalized. And we're seeing other examples of that through political ideology. When you equate Moms for Liberty and pavement education and your local state family policy council and the Family Research Council and the Alliance Defending Freedom with the Ku Klux Klan, there are a handful of people who will take that seriously and believe that what you're saying is actually real and that these are real dangerous people, when in reality, they just disagree.
Yeah. Yeah. That's honestly, it's a crazy story.
Well, it's a crazy reality, but let's talk about another component of this that I think is really relevant, is that the SPLC has done quite well financially in the course of this whole process, because, when you become anti-white supremacist and you kind of the leader of the anti-white supremacy movement, people like you, and they do for a long time, and that was the brand that they built up. They now have, as of, end of October 24 is the most recent information I could find, $822 million total assets. Just some of that's going to be property, but they have hundreds of millions of dollars sitting in bank accounts that they have collected because they're very effective, mail fundraisers, direct mail marketing fundraisers. They send money to people who are like, hey, help us stop white supremacy. And they're like, okay, let's stop white supremacy and let's send it back to you. So they send money, and they have been accumulating a lot of money. And the reason why I think this is relevant to the conversation, as we have demonstrated, I think, they have greatly expanded their areas of concern beyond actual white supremacy. And I think they've done so in part because they have to continue to justify their existence. Because by God's grace, and we can all celebrate the fact that the Ku Klux Klan has not had the social, influence that it did at one point in our country. And white supremacists are marginalized by literally everyone. There are probably thousands of committed white supremacists in America still, but maybe not tens of thousands, certainly not millions, maybe not even hundreds of thousands. That dynamic still exists in the world, but it is marginalized by everybody in the mainstream. And so if your brand is, let's stop white supremacy, and white supremacy has functionally been stopped, how do you continue to send, motivate donors to give you money? You have to, and here's the concern that I want to talk about, manufacture perhaps more white supremacy. And that goes back to the question that we started with at the beginning. Why would an anti-white supremacist organization give $3 million? Why would an anti-white supremacist organization give $3 million to white supremacists, as the Department of Justice has now claimed they have?
It certainly appears, at the very least, extremely hypocritical. I know that they have pushed back on these allegations, and essentially, to my understanding, the reason that they have given is that they were paying these leaders in the KKK and these other truly white supremacist groups, they were paying them as informants. So they were paying the leaders to give them information that would then help stop them from being white supremacists. But I mean, I'm certainly not a criminal justice expert, but it seems really strange to me to have like a non-governmental organization, setting up informants. Like, I think we need to stop that if that's actually happening. Exactly.
They're not a law enforcement agency, but here's another reason why that doesn't make sense to me. Because the thing that they have been accused of doing illegally is hiding all of the transfers of money.
Why would you hide it?
That they have shell company, give to shell company, give to shell company, ultimately giving it to the white supremacists.
It doesn't look good.
Now, if I am your informant, Ashley, and you want to send me money for information and I'm embedded within some criminal organization, I know as your informant that you're going to give me money. I'm happy to take your money. You don't need to hide the paper trail that gives me the money because I already know, and you're doing something that is in that scenario totally appropriate. But if the real goal for you, Ashley, is to make sure no one knows that you are giving me money, then that's why you have to play all those games, break a whole bunch of banking laws in order to hide where that money is coming from. Because you're not trying to hide it from your informant, which is what they're now saying is, oh, they were using we're paying them because it's an informant. That is a potentially plausible explanation for why you would pay somebody for information. That happens. That does not explain why you go through all of the steps to make sure to try to hide the paper trail that shows that you're paying them money. Because if it's on the up and up, that's a pretty easy explanation. Yeah, I gave him money, here's why. But if you are actually, and here's the alternative explanation of what they're being accused of, is apparently some of this money went to, for example, the event, the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally, which got a lot of attention. When was that? 2015-16. Joe Biden referenced that as the reason that he ended up running for president again. And Trump's statements about that rally were completely misconstrued, dishonestly. So at that event where he was accused of saying that there were good people on both sides of white supremacy, which is not what he said, but that lie has been repeated many, many, many times. Lots of reasons to criticize President Trump. That is not one of them, because that's not, in fact, what he said. So that episode was used in very helpful ways for the left. Now we know that some money went from the SPLC to the organizers of that particular event. The motive of that is what is disputed. They say, oh, no, we were just funding an informant. The alternative explanation that, if you're inclined to be cynical of the SPLC, and there are many who are, is that actually SPLC, you needed more white supremacy so you could go raise money. So you paid people to organize white supremacist events. And then you leverage that for the thing that you do, because you're actually needing more white supremacy to exist, or at least appear to exist for your purposes.
And what the DOJ is saying is that in so doing, they have defrauded their donors because they're using donor money to contribute to the thing that they tell the donors they're actually fighting against.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean,
among other things, there's the banking, the wire stuff, and you're defrauding your donors.
Yes.
The reality is there's going to be a lot of people. Because we're so tribal, the supporters of the SPLC are very likely to believe the SPLC's explanation is, of course, we were just paying informants to help take these organizations.
And this is a politically motivated move by the Trump
DOJ
Right, it's just
going after people they don't like. Yeah.
It's Fox News going after the left. Whatever, So I'm not sure anybody's mind is going to change on the polls here, right? But it's kind of like for those of you who didn't have a strong opinion about the SPLC before they started listening to this conversation, we don't have all the information, and we're just left to decide for ourselves what is the more likely explanation. And I'm not even sure. I don't think I know the answer to this. Am I predisposed against the SPLC for a variety of reasons? Indeed, I am. Are there informants? Yes. I've never heard before this of a nonprofit hiring informants.
I haven't either. It's suspect.
Can't say it's not possible. I need more information to know if that's something that happens before I'm like, oh yeah, that's fair. So, even if the SPLC did not manufacture white supremacy for their own benefit, what we know has happened, Ashley, is that there are people who do manufacture racist incidents. Jussie Smollett is a great example of this. And for those of you who may not remember that name, handful of years ago in Chicago. He basically hired a couple guys to assault him in downtown Chicago outside of the subway. And he made up, they were alleged, his assaulters were alleged to have said, "This is MAGA country. Go away," because he's a gay black man.
They connected it to Trump. It wasn't just a manufactured like racially or sexual identity motivated crime. Like they connected it politically back to Trump. Yeah.
And then we later found out that Jussie Smollett, in fact, paid these two guys to do this thing on this camera to kind of like make it look like he was a victim and to create this episode of, racist hatred that, from the MAGA movement, which is the narrative that they would very much like to create. But it was all fake. And he ended up facing criminal charges for it. Yeah, I don't even remember how that. Did he get acquitted? I don't even remember it.
I actually was just wondering that, and I'm kind of trying to look it up. Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like, ugh, man, racism is a bad thing, and then you create this fake, racial interaction. It's kind of like, women who falsely accuse men of, you know what I mean, of sexual assault or rape or whatever. It's kind of like, okay, there are real victims out there, like, of racism, of sexual assault. Like, this is not a good thing.
And that kind of raises the question, because even if if we demur on the SPLC issue, we know the Jussie Smollett thing happened. And if somebody else wants to see a whole other long list, go to fakehatecrimes.com, which is a website that has documented a whole bunch of other incidences. It didn't get tons of press, but there are many examples of people who have painted racial slurs on their own cars, on their own houses, kids who have vandalized their own dorm rooms, claiming to be victims of some kind of racism when in fact they did it for themselves. And clearly you're kind of disturbed if you do that. But what is the motive? Why would anyone want to be a victim? And have we created a culture where being a victim is its own kind of like social status? It's desirable to be a victim, so we've created an incentive for people to want to like look like something that they are not, and therefore manufacture a problem that may not exist to the degree they want it to have. Because if you have to go manufacture your own like victimhood, maybe things are fine for you, right? In your dorm room or in your community.
Well, I mean, I think you just go back to the Jussie Smollett case. Well, I mean, he connected it back to MAGA. I mean, presumably he told. So in that scenario, I would think he was in some way politically or ideologically motivated to create a situation that would, and because he's famous and everything, that would tip the scales towards, I guess, away from Trump in an election season. I mean, I think in that case, clearly.
I think in that case, like with Jussie Smollett, and I think in maybe I will be less gracious than you are. But I really think like a Jussie Smollett believes it's going to help him personally to be the victim of anti-Trump, of Trump caused racism. Yeah, which is why he manufactured. This is going to help my career. I'm going to get attention for this by being the victim of a hate crime, especially from him. Everybody's, I'm going to be a cause celeb. And so that's the payoff in my mind for him. And to a lesser degree, the kid in the college dorm room who does the same thing. It's like, hey, if I'm the victim of hate, people are going to really like me more than they do right now. I'm going to get attention that is favorable. So let's do it.
It could be the motivation. Again, I don't understand what's happening psychologically there. I don't fully understand the motivations. But clearly, as in the Jussie Smollett case or any proven case where they've created a situation in which they're the victim, clearly there's some nefarious purpose there. And I think also people can just sometimes jump to conclusions. Yeah.
One other observation I want to make about this, though, is I have a concern that the manufacturing, there's part of it, there's the manufacturing of racism, and then there's the insistence by and this is the far left. This is not middle America, but we've heard the voices. Oh, all you white Christian straight men are a problem. And you guys are, in a critical theory framework, you're the oppressors and you are making everybody else your victim because you're just trying to hold on to your social power. And we've seen all the data about young men and young white men significantly moving to the right politically, in part, I think, because of how beat up they feel by the left. And there was a couple of years ago where I saw one of these polls, and I have daughters who are 21, 19, 7. They're now 21. I think my daughter was like 20, 19 at the time. And I asked her about this. Why do you think young men in your generation, Gen Z, are moving to the right? And she said, without hesitation, it's because progressives hate them. And when you are a young man, you were told how awful you are over and over and over again. Eventually, they're like, well, if you don't want me, I will leave. And so they have moved the other way politically. And I am concerned that some of that movement and some of the criticism that has come from the left has been ethnically based. You're bad because, not just because you're a man, you're especially bad if you're a white man. I'm concerned that the response from young white men to that criticism, which is not subtle and it's not rare necessarily, some of the response to that is going to own their white ethnicity in a way that is not healthy, and perhaps even generate this sense of like white defensiveness, white superiority, and maybe even racism that we all know is bad, may not have existed otherwise, but you're going to kind of fuel this. And I think we've seen this in this right on kind of the far right, the secular right, the internet right.
Yeah.
Where we're seeing perhaps some real racism arise in response to the criticism that they're seeing. Do you think that makes any sense?
It does make sense, and it is concerning. It is concerning to see. I mean, it's upsetting because I do think not that things are perfect, obviously. And I mean, racism sadly will be around, until Jesus comes back. And yet, in our society, we've come so far, and to see any kind of a regression, and racial tensions being stoked, it's upsetting. And it's not a good, it's just not a good direction to go. And I do think, having this hate map and where you're just kind of randomly slapping, labels around, these people are hateful, these people are hateful, these people are hateful, it doesn't help. I mean, you've degraded your language. Now, when you call the KKK a hate group, it doesn't mean the same thing anymore. So I just, yeah, it's upsetting. It's upsetting. We need to keep going in the right direction. We don't need to go back in the wrong direction. And I mean, I think this is, more than we can unpack today, but there are examples of, I don't even know what label I'd put on it, but just like kind of far right, white supremacist rumblings or something.
Yeah, there is, I don't know if I haven't seen data that suggests there's like a rise in white supremacy. And I certainly hope there is.
Well, I just think there's been a shift in conversation and like what some people are willing to say.
I think there is a festering frustration in that quarter of the world. I think the gospel also solves for that, because I think, the overemphasis on race from the left could trigger an overemphasis on race from the right. And I think the correct response to both of those things is to put race in its proper context, which is it exists. We are different ethnicities, like we are different sizes, like we are different genders. We are different in many ways, and that in our ethnicities included in that. But our ethnicity will never be the most important thing about us. And I think the beauty of the gospel and the reason why it unites humanity rather than divides us is because it reminds us that we are equal. We are all equal at the foot of the cross. The most important thing about us is that we are made in the image of God. And if we remember that, that means the things you and I, the most important thing about you is the same as the most important thing about me. And that's true of everybody that we will meet. And that creates inherent equality. But the most important thing about me is either my sex, now you're an other. If it's my ethnicity, lots of people are an other, right? And now I'm in an adversarial position to them. And so I think the important the solution to all of this is really making sure that our different identity categories, and we have them, that we order them properly. We make sure what the most important thing is, and make sure that the most important thing about ourselves in our own mind is the thing that is also the most important thing about everybody else. Because then we're on the same page, and we are more alike than we are different, and then we can act like that.
Yeah. And what you said is really true. The ground is level at the foot of the cross. We are all made in the image of God and have dignity and worth. And we're all sinful and we all need Christ, whether we realize it or not. And so that is the great unifying force and truly the only solution to hate and sin. So, well, thank you so much, Joseph. This has been a great episode, and we are going to close it off for today. Thank you so much for being with us. Please join us every Tuesday and Friday. We will release new episodes. Like and subscribe and share with a friend. Also, give us a 5-star review because that really helps. We so appreciate you being with